at Stanford University Libraries as curator for Estonian and Baltic Studies. And on behalf of organizers of today's event, I am very, very happy to welcome you to this discussion on how the Estonian model potentially can help us expand economic opportunity here in the States. I am very happy to start this event by introducing our today's speakers. Avik Roy is the president of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, freeup.org, which is a non-partisan and non-profit think tank that conducts original research on expanding opportunity to those who least have it. His work has been praised widely on both the right and also on the left. He serves as the policy editor at Forbes, where he writes on politics and policy. His writing has also appeared in many other publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, etc. He is an Aspen Institute Health Innovators Fellow, and he also serves on advisory boards of multiple institutions, such as the National Institute for Healthcare Management, the Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream, and the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Karen Jagodin serves as the CEO of Vabamu Museum of Occupations and Freedom in Tallinn, Estonia. Vabamu is the largest active non-profit museum in Estonia with a mission to educate the people of Estonia and its visitors about the recent past and the fragility of freedom, and also to advocate for justice and the rule of law. At Vabamu, Karen has been a primary driver behind the Why Estonia exhibition that focused on the emergence and development of the digital society in Estonia. Vabamu operates in 3 areas: Vabamu museums, youth engagement, and global conversations. And today's event is part of those global conversations, a series of talks, lectures, and seminars focusing on the benefits and fragility of freedom. So what we're going to do today is first we're going to enjoy listening to Karen and Avik talk about this topic, and then we're going to make sure to leave some time for a Q&A session at the end. So once that time comes, we're going to have 2 mic runners in the room. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, introduce yourselves, and ask away. So without further ado, Karen and Avik, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lizzie. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And to begin with, maybe you can, Avik, start a bit talking about FreeUp and what's your mission and how do you think this is relevant in connection to what we will be talking later on here today?
Sure, Karen. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here, and it's great to be back at Stanford. I always enjoy my trips out here. We have a number of direct relationships with people at Stanford. Lan Hee Chen, who's at the Hoover Institution and on the Stanford faculty as Director of Domestic Policy, is on our board, an old friend of mine from various things that we've done together. And John Hartley, who's a PhD student in the economics department here, is one of our senior fellows in financial regulation and macroeconomic policy. And so I started FreeUp, or the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity. The shorter names were all taken, so we had to use a longer name, in 2016. And my career track, did my mic go out? There we go.
Mine's working.
Oh, something's happening. Okay. Let's see. All right. We started FreeUp in 2016, and the basic idea was that I'd worked on 3 presidential campaigns. I'd spent a dozen years as a biotech investor in Boston and New York, and the thing that I fell into public policy accidentally. So my first job out of medical school was at Bain Capital, and the founder of Bain Capital ended up running for president. And the second time I ran for president, he asked me to help him design his health reform plan, and because I was an investor in healthcare companies, and so I got involved in that. And after Mitt Romney lost, I was asked by a lot of people, like, okay, now that you're this Republican healthcare person, how should we fix healthcare? And I said, well, we should achieve universal coverage, but show how private sector competition and innovation can play the main role in delivering that. And I got a lot of blank stares at the time because the debate was, well, if you're for universal health insurance, you're for a single-payer government-run system. You're not for a private sector system. And I was making the opposite argument, that actually the private sector can deliver that outcome just as well, if not better, as the public sector, and we have real-world examples of this around the world. For example, in Switzerland, they have a system of universal health insurance that's delivered entirely by private health insurance. They're not the only country for whom that's true, but that's one of the best examples. And so I started spending 2 years developing this plan and working with a number of presidential campaigns in the 2016 cycle with similar ideas, and those candidates didn't win either. And so I was left at the end of the 2016 cycle thinking, okay, what do I do now? And there were several things that I had come to appreciate about politics and policy and how all these things intersect. The first is that we have this sense of this left-right dynamic in America. And a lot of people who are very passionate about politics, whether you're involved in it directly or you watch cable news, is the sense of, well, for my team to win, the other team has to lose. You know, if I'm a progressive, the right has to lose for me to win, or if I'm a conservative, the left has to lose. And a lot of our work, like this universal coverage to the private sector idea, was based on a different approach to politics, a positive sum approach, where you can achieve the progressive outcome of universal health insurance, but do so using a means or a mechanism that free marketeers would find attractive. And that you could actually have a fiscally sustainable healthcare system that is secure financially and economically for future generations, but also one that actually protects vulnerable people. And shouldn't we want those kinds of outcomes in America? And there's a lot of polling data to show that if you actually ask Americans, you know, we have the sense that our politics are broken, that the left and the right hate each other and everyone is fighting. But if you actually turn off the TV and you look at polling data or you talk to your neighbors, there's a very different view out there. 80% of Americans, poll after poll shows, believe that America should stand for the principle of equal opportunity and be a country where everybody has a fair shot at success. Yes, there are people on the extremes on each end who may not share that idea, but the vast majority of Americans do, and that's true across the world as well. And so the whole idea of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity is, can we find these positive sum ideas where you can use an approach based on free enterprise, technological innovation, individual liberty, and pluralism to improve social mobility, to improve the lives of Americans whose incomes or wealth are below the US median. And those are our rules. We won't work on anything unless it meets those two tests of a net expansion of freedom and a meaningful improvement for Americans on the bottom half of the economic ladder. And that leads us to work on things like healthcare, like education reform, criminal justice reform, inflation, it's the cost of living, energy costs, housing, all these areas where you can see that there might be a pro-competition, pro-innovation way to reduce the cost of living or make life more affordable for more people and thereby increase social mobility. So we talk a lot about income inequality in America and around the world, but what income inequality doesn't tell you is if you make $40,000 in Santa Clara County or you make $40,000 in Dallas County in Texas, that $40,000 goes a lot farther in Dallas than it does in Palo Alto. But they're making the same income. Their incomes are the same. They're equal, right? So there's an inequality that comes from disposable income. After you've paid your taxes and your rent and your healthcare bills, what's left after that? And so a lot of our work ends up in that space of how do you create disposable income, not so much exact equality, but at least equality of opportunity. Okay, so we're in 12 policy areas, and we've been involved in a lot of major national debates. We were very involved in trying to reopen schools during the pandemic. We were very involved in some of the drug pricing reforms, the Inflation Reduction Act. So we've worked with both Democrats and Republicans on areas where we believe we can improve economic opportunity through market-based means and mechanisms. So I was very grateful last summer to have the opportunity to visit Estonia and get to learn more about the very interesting digital infrastructure that Estonia has built for a lot of government services. And it's something I've long followed and long been interested in from the outside because that has been a major problem in the U.S. Is, you know, we saw that with healthcare.gov when the Obamacare website rolled out and basically couldn't serve anyone. You know, there was this incident here during the pandemic where a lot of people were unemployed and couldn't get the benefits because the unemployment system didn't work. Veterans healthcare is another area where a lot of veterans basically have trouble accessing the veteran system because of IT that's outdated or clunky. So there are a lot of examples of situations where in the U.S. we have challenges that that aren't challenges if you have the kind of infrastructure that Estonia has. And so that's what led me to be very interested in what Estonia's been doing and seeing if we can learn from that to improve social services and opportunity in America.
So perhaps, I hope you can hear me. Perhaps you can share some examples from Estonian experience. So if you think back now to your last visit or the information you had in advance, what surprised you most, or how would you describe your experience when you were firsthand in Estonia?
Well, it exceeded my expectations, which were not zero. I mean, I already knew enough about it to make the effort to fly to Estonia, so it's not like I was expecting it to be uninteresting. But I think it's much more impressive than you can really imagine without really digging into it. And why is it impressive? Well, it's impressive for a couple of reasons. One is that it really works. It works extremely well. And you would be better equipped than me to explain to the audience what that entails. But from the outside, as an American visitor, I think what was really impressive about it was, first of all, how secure it was. So, we have a lot of problems in the U.S. with identity theft, identity fraud. Someone claiming your social security number and taking your social security benefits from you, or other benefits you might have, impersonating you to hack into your bank account. These things are a lot harder to do if you have a cryptographically secure identity that is impossible for other people to forge. And that's, you can only do that if you have a nationally or even a state-based in the U.S. context, system of identity, digital identity. That digital identity is really the foundation of everything else that Estonia has built on top of it. Because if you can prove that this is you when you're voting, or when you're applying for unemployment benefits, or you're applying for you're getting married, or you know which school you're going to enroll in, like all that stuff happens automatically. Your electronic health records, all that stuff is tied to your unique identifier. And it makes all these digital services work more smoothly. And one of the principles we were talking about last night at dinner that you reminded me of is that the information, the IT principle in Estonia is we only want to, as a government, we only want to ask you for information once. Once the information is in the system, we shouldn't have to ask you for it again. And think about all the times you've had to fill out forms, whether it's at the doctor's office or at the DMV or whatever, and you're filling out the same information over and over and over again because they don't have that ability to just authenticate you as an individual based on this digital identity. And if you just kind of, again, to put this in the American context, the discourse we've had here is in the opposite end of the spectrum. In 1996, we passed a health reform which was important at the time called the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, which you've probably interacted with if you've interacted with the healthcare system. And as part of that, Congress instructed the Department of Health and Human Services to develop a unique patient identifier for every patient in the country. But Ron Paul, who was a libertarian congressman from Texas at the time, was passionately against this, thought that this was going to be a tool that the federal government used to surveil all of its citizens, and this would be the beginning of the authoritarian state, and basically defunded that particular measure in the bill, and that defunding has basically continued almost to this day. And you can understand on some level why he felt that way, because there have been a lot of leaks, there have been a lot of hacks of government systems in the U.S. and private systems in the U.S. So you could imagine feeling like, well, gosh, if I had some identity, ID number, and the government had that could get leaked. Well, the fact is, it already has been. China has all of our social security numbers. Every hacker in the world has all. I mean, all this stuff has already been leaked so many times that it's already out there. And so I think the thing that's often a disconnect here in the U.S. is people don't realize how much their privacy has already been compromised, whether it's through hacks or it's through legal tech business models where basically they're taking all this information, you're handing them every time you open your web browser or download an app, and not realizing that your location is being tracked by 50 different apps that are selling that data to 1,000 different businesses and using and monetizing that all the time. Like, that's happening today. And the government has access to those same tools as the private sector. So your privacy is already out the door, and the Estonian system is much more private because it has this digital infrastructure. And I think it's a bit counterintuitive for the American audience, but that's why it's so important to really study what Estonia has done.
I think when we as Vabamu, as a memory institution, started to research for the exhibition and now started to collect this topic also in our collections, it's the first time for us to start putting together this narrative, how it was possible 30 years ago to come up with the digital society and what was necessary for that. And a lot of what we don't know all the answers yet, how exactly it happened or why it happened, but a lot of this is also about untangible things in society, like the trust between citizens and the government, the public-private partnership, the kind of a momentum that was there, that was used. So if you said about identity thefts and corporate interests and things like that, what is there right now in USA that could support this change towards digital society or taking in use of these experiences that we have in Estonia?
Well, first of all, I just want to say how remarkable that is, right? We were just talking about how Americans are paranoid about the surveillance state. Well, imagine if you're Estonia, you've just become independent of the Soviet Union. You're even more paranoid about the surveillance state because you've experienced it every day, right? So it's not like they didn't care about the surveillance state. They knew all about it. And yet they still decided to go this route. I think that's a remarkable political story that is very important. And one of the things we were talking about yesterday that's really important to understand about what Estonia's done is they're not using cutting-edge technology. This is 1991, or actually 1971 technology that they used to build this system. So this is not something where this is just totally novel. These are pretty old cryptographic concepts that underlie, and technological concepts that underlie what Estonia's built. We could very easily do this today. Plenty of people have the skill set to build this kind of system in the US. The main thing that Estonia overcame was this potential mistrust of the government. And Estonia had enough of a high trust society where people believed in the people who were trying to set this up. And that maybe that came out of the fact that the leaders of Estonia who fought for independence from the USSR had the trust of people that, look, we're leading the independence of the US from the USSR because we don't want the surveillance system. So they had that credibility in a way that in our political circumstance, we don't have that same level of credibility or trust in our leaders. Now I've forgotten after going on that rant. What was it that you actually asked me?
What you actually have now in US?
Oh yeah. So what do we have now? So
we
do. So there's a couple things. So there are some people who've tried to basically build this in the private sector. You know, to give an example, Experian Health has so Experian is the credit rating company, credit rating agency that you all use when you get credit cards or home loans. They have a health division that has built a unique patient identifier that patients don't use, and it's basically for hospitals and doctors' practices and labs to use to communicate data amongst each other for the purpose of sharing patient data. So if you go to a primary care physician and you get your blood tested, and then that goes to a LabCorp, say, and then maybe you get into the hospital and they want your data. So in order for all that data to be linked to the same human being, they've created unique patient identifiers for everyone but they haven't given those unique patient IDs to the patients because there's all this sensitivity around, gosh, if you do that, then all of a sudden you've got this ID where we're all getting tracked. So the infrastructure exists, and in Estonia, it's worth saying, the Estonian government used, I think, 5 or 6 different vendors to build this digital identity system. So it wasn't developed directly by the government. It was contracted out to tech companies within Estonia to build it. And so we theoretically could do that here. We have a much more cumbersome system of government contracting than probably Estonia does. But the tools are there, and we have social security numbers too, which again are a bit antiquated and don't have some of the features that a cryptographically secure system would have, where you've got a password connected to your social security or your equivalent ID number that or a PIN code that you can control, that you can change, you can be aware when it's been when someone else has tried to use it or try to enter your ID into a system, a government system or a bank or something like that. So all those features exist. We use features like that all the time. If you've used two-factor authentication, that's basically kind of a pretty similar principle. So all these things exist. This technology has been around for a long time. We just have not wanted to apply it this way. And it may be that maybe there's a financial institution or a healthcare system that decides, we need to do this for our purposes, and then it becomes so widely used that in fact it becomes a kind of private sector overlay into, instead of having a government ID, maybe there's some, maybe there's somebody at Stanford who, I know there are Web3 projects that are trying to do this, where say, can we have a blockchain-based, validated version of digital identity? But these things are often so niche, they don't get widely used, but maybe over time they will.
Well, we are talking about a change in a society, and changes sometimes happen very quickly, sometimes it takes a lot of time. In Estonia, there was a decision to make these changes as quickly as possible, and there was no legacy that was holding us back. There was this trial and error mindset that we can fail, we can do mistakes, and we can try again. And there was political will to do this quickly. Let's get this thing sorted. How do you feel? How is it? How should it be done in here in America? Either it's a long process, a long change you want to see in the society that takes decades, or it should be done fast and a jump forward in some ways.
Well, first of all, I think what I've been thinking about, particularly in advance of this conversation, is it's not just America that's resisting this digital identity infrastructure. It's Europe too. The European Union has a big initiative to try to catch up with Estonia, and they're having trouble doing it because Europeans have a lot of the same reservations that Americans have about a digital ID system. And so it may be that Estonia ends up having this kind of advantage over the rest of the world because no one else wants to build this digital infrastructure. And there's a lot of, again, social services, fiscal stability, economic efficiency that becomes kind of a built-in advantage for Estonia that nobody else has, that could endure for a long time. I think that's the base case scenario, I would say, at this point. But if the U.S., and look, there are organizations, institutions, particularly in the healthcare space, that are advocating for universal IDs because they see how many medical errors and other problems are caused by not having digital identity. But I think it's going to be just too hard at the federal level to do it because the mistrust is justified and the mistrust is entrenched. But I could imagine a situation where maybe there's a state where it's a little bit more like Estonia, where there's a high trust socially, maybe a state like a Minnesota, not a state that everyone's kind of fighting over, but a place where, one party is in control and everyone's kind of, what's the Lake Wobegon thing? Everyone's above average. Everyone's got the kind of, there's a social cohesion that may lead people to say, hey, I trust my leaders to install something like this, and maybe the Mayo Clinic gets involved. They're based in Minnesota, and you get some sort of system like that that's built in a state where they're able to show that they can do this in a validated way, and then other states or at a national level, once there's that comfort level, can do it. But that I think that the thing that's, again, very counterintuitive, that's really important for Americans to learn, is that if you have a digital identity system that's provable and secure, your identity is much more secure and much more protected from government surveillance and intrusion than the system we have today.
Scalability is a very important question. You mentioned that maybe state by state is the way to go, because I guess a lot of people here also might think that it's a beautiful story you have there in Estonia, but let's face it, you have 1.3 million people and you are a small country. We here have a lot of people and a lot of other kinds of issues. So you think that your proposal or your idea is that state by state could be the way to...
I mean, I wish it didn't have to be that way, and this is, I wish we could just wave a magic wand and say, let's have an Estonia-like system that's national, because, I mean, there's an enormous amount of waste, fraud, and abuse in our social service today. It's conservatively estimated that 15 to 30% of all Medicaid spending is waste, fraud, and abuse. This is a program we spend $500 billion a year on. Medicare, we spend $1 trillion a year on Medicare, at least 10%, 15, 20% waste, fraud, and abuse. That's a lot of money. Just to put that in context, so I just said, 30% of Medicaid and then 20% of Medicare. That's $350 billion a year. Our defense budget is $700 billion a year, $800 billion a year. So we're talking about half the defense budget, and those two programs just kind of flush down the toilet, basically. So to the degree that America, if you think about national security, you care about social services, you want those programs to work better, maybe you feel they're underfunded. Well, the best way to fund them more robustly is to make sure we're not wasting money in the way we deliver those programs and those services. So there's a lot of areas, and again, the unemployment insurance example in California is really instructive, because you had these lockdowns. The government shut down a lot of the employers, so people lost their jobs. There was this huge spike on unemployment benefits, and at one point in the midst of the pandemic, 40% of the applications for unemployment benefits in California were being flagged as potentially fraudulent because maybe the middle name was on one form but not on your Social Security card, or maybe your nickname was on the employer's form but not on your Social Security card. And if there was any mismatch of one character, it would be flagged and there was a required manual review of that application to make sure that you weren't trying to steal someone's unemployment benefits. Meanwhile, the criminals who actually have your Social Security numbers, they know how to not make a mistake on that, and they draw down the benefits. And so they were flagging 40% of people, of whom almost all were innocent, and not able to prevent the actual fraud that was going on because people had hacked the system. So, and that's all about having provable digital identity, where you can prove this is me. Here's the person who's applying for this stuff, and people. So it's one of these things where California could be a place where maybe you could get this done. I don't know, but I think I wonder if California would be willing to get it done, because one of the if you have a left point of view, one thing that digital identity would then do is it would make it harder for people who are undocumented to access some of these services. And if you want them to access some of these services, digital identity could make that harder. So there are political considerations always that come in. That's why I think Minnesota might be the place where you might have a better shot. But I hope that we can start to have the conversation. We're not even really having the conversation today. And I see this as something where, as our lives get more and more digital, it's incredibly important to start to have this conversation. Because if we don't have provable digital identity in the future our AI overlords, it's going to be even harder to prove our identity. It's going to be really important to solve these problems.
So this is very much a question of technology as well. You are working with the aim of freedom in mind. We are working with the same aim. How can technology be used and implemented in keeping the society free?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I mean, we could talk a lot about that. I'd say that, more broadly, as I alluded to in the beginning, the innovation, competition can do a lot to drive down the cost and increase the quality of the goods and services we use every day. And that increases social mobility, because if you can access a lot more things, think about educational opportunities. The fact that even if your school is failing, in theory, anyone can go to Khan Academy on YouTube and learn things that your school is failing to teach you. That's a revolution in technology that did not exist 15, 20 years ago, or at least didn't exist widely. So there are lots of ways in which technology can increase social mobility. But in terms of where the Estonian example is particularly impressive is in this delivery of social services and execution of an elimination of identity theft and fraud, and the security of that database, where, kind of like with your credit reports in the U.S., you can go online and go to Experian or Equifax, and you can see who's checked what your credit score is, right? And the Estonian system is like that for your identity. You can go on a website and be like, okay, who's checked my identity? Who's been looking me up lately? And that creates a level of trust, freedom, privacy, where your information is secure, who's looking it up, and if there's some illegal search, and there have been incidents in Estonia where, I think there's one I read about where a police officer was about to marry a girl, and he looked up her stuff online using his access to her ID, and this is a huge scandal. And the thing is, it rarely happens, which is why it's a huge scandal when it does. Whereas for us, literally, we're giving away our data 500 times a minute every time we're just sitting here. So, in fact, this conversation is being recorded by some of your phones and being transmitted to some bot somewhere. So unfortunately, I'm not advertising any products, I guess, that anyone can buy. So maybe it's not that useful to advertisers. But you see what I'm saying? Like I think that's, once you have a system in which you can access everything online. And one of the things you hear in the U.S., and we were talking about this again yesterday, was well, what if someone doesn't have a smartphone? And that's kind of like you would get a blank stare if you asked that question in Estonia, because everybody has a smartphone. And pretty much everybody here does too, and to the degree they don't, yes, let's make sure that they get the financial assistance to do that. And there are already programs that exist in the U.S. to make sure that people have access to digital technology where they don't. Broadband in rural areas is one area where we still have some work to do. But broadly speaking, the vast, vast majority of the population, even low-income people, have access to smartphones, have access to digital identity. And if we want them to have the same access to the tools that all of us take for granted, digital identity and internet infrastructure are very important.
You mentioned education. There's a story I now have to share. Just last week when I came to US and landed at SFO, and we're waiting a regular moment at the car rental for my car to be ready. And another guy stepped in to the assistant who was managing my case and asked, like, where are you from? And I said, oh, I'm from Estonia. Ah, I know, you are the most digitally advanced country in the world. And I was like, oh, yes, indeed, we are. And the conversation went on that, yes, I know everything about this and I know why you are. It's because of education, because you teach already youngsters in the 3rd grade to program and code and all things like that. Should we be having a discussion about education? Is this actually one of the cornerstones that needs this long time change so that we could talk about digital society in the US?
Yes and no. And I'll start with the no and then I'll go to the yes. The no is, in 1885, the entrance exam into Yale or Harvard or Columbia was conducted entirely in Greek and Latin. Like literally no one who goes to Yale today could pass the entrance exam to go to Yale. In fact, the diplomas at Yale are in Latin, and probably only 1% of the students can actually read them. So there's a degree to which people in a time when there was no technology and grew up being educated in one-room schoolhouses were way more educated because they read the classics. They were much more facile with language. They knew how to write. They knew how to articulate a concept. I think in a lot of those qualitative ways that have nothing to do with technology, it's actually just what we're actually teaching. What's the curriculum? What's the basis of education? We are doing far worse because we've just moved so far away from the way we educated people 150, 200 years ago. So that's the no. I think, if anything, we have to actually relearn how to educate people from the way we educated people 100, 200 years ago. But on the flip side, where Estonia and Finland also have done very well is because you encounter so much sabotage from the Russians, you've done an amazing job at educating students on how to discern truth from fakery, from deep fakes from reality, fact from fiction, in ways that Americans have not. We have become a fairly gullible society when it comes to a lot of things that circulate around the internet. It's harder for us to discern what's true and what's false. And you all in Estonia have done a great job of that. I think that to me is the area of education where we can do a lot better. So that's number one. The number two, I'll never forget something Sal Khan told me when I met him for the one and only time. He was getting an award from an organization that I used to be a part of. And he said something really amazing. He said, there was a time 500 years ago, or maybe in the Middle Ages, where 10% of a region could read, and now we have places that have 100% or 95% literacy rate. What if we could imagine a place where, okay, maybe 10% of Santa Clara County has taken calculus? Can we get that to 90%? Or 95%, or maybe it's not Santa Clara County, maybe it's Kern County or something. But it's possible that advances in pedagogy that artificial intelligence and other tools give us could enable us to have mass customization of learning, where people learn in different ways. All of us in this room, we learn in different ways. Some people are really good at kind of abstract thoughts. Some people need a practical, real-life example to kind of get a concept. So it may be that over time, what technology allows us to do is have mass customization of education, where through testing and other tools, a computer could get a sense of, okay, this person really learns better if we instruct them this way versus that way. and then we try to steer their learning in that direction. Or, for example, just disaggregating subject material where someone might be really good at math but not really good at reading and need remedial instruction in reading but need actually more advanced instruction in math so that they're not slowed down by just being in third grade and, well, you're going to take third grade math whether you care or not. So I think that's an area where technology can be very interesting, is customization of learning to tailor to the student more. Something that we've been involved in at my organization, our K-12 reform scholar, education reform scholar, is a guy named Dan Lips, who in 2005 wrote this paper where he proposed this thing called education savings accounts, where every parent would get a certain amount of money to then invest in the education of their kids. Part of that could go to a school, but part of that could go for tutoring. Part of that could go for, maybe it's an online course that allows you to learn something that, whether it's remedial or advanced relative to your grade level. And it seems to me that, and that's true in college too, by the way. You can imagine all sorts of ways in which mass customization, modular learning, where the learning is really tailored to you and not based on a industrial 20th century model of everyone's in third grade, everyone's going to learn the same thing. That's where I think technology can be very interesting, is in allowing us to have a more tailored approach to education.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good idea. As we are here at Stanford right now, and among the audience here, and most probably also online, there are several students or grad students listening to us. What's your recommendation or like an idea you want to give them, because they can take all this technology and the revolution that has happened in technology and create something out of it for the next 20 or 30 years. So what's in your vision could you want to see in 20 or 30 years' time in US that they could start working with right now?
Gosh, there's a lot of things. I'd say, I think there are two very, very big problems that were challenges that we have in America that are. I'm not sure I understand. Oh boy, see, Siri's listening to me too. Let's turn that off. There are two big problems, there are two big challenges that we face in America that are going to overwhelm all the others, that particularly for students who are entering adulthood and entering the real world and are going to spend the majority of their lives in they're going to be the ones who inhabit this 21st century. The two big problems, and they're related. The first is the federal debt. The federal debt is now at $30 trillion. It exceeds the annual output of the U.S. economy for the first time since World War II. Within 5 years, we're going to be spending more money paying interest on the debt than we do on defense, national defense. This may seem like an abstract problem that doesn't affect you every day. We're in this beautiful place where everything seems really wonderful. Our bottled water is very fancy. The flowers are lovely. They smell wonderful, I'm sure. I haven't had to get a chance to sniff them yet. But this is an overhang that is getting massively worse. The Congressional Budget Office projects that the federal debt in 10 years will be $50 trillion, not $30 trillion. Margaret Thatcher famously once said, at some point, the problem with socialism is we eventually run out of other people's money. And the problem for us as Americans is eventually we're going to run out of people to lend us money because there literally is not enough money in the world. The total amount of net wealth in the world is about $450 trillion. So imagine a world in which our federal debt's $200 trillion. How much, is the rest of the world going to basically spend all its time lending money to us, or are they going to want to do other things with their money, right? So you get to a certain point where people are just going to stop lending us money or are going to gradually decrease how much they lend us. That's already happening. And that leads me to my second challenge, which is inflation. So the reason why we're having persistent inflation, I would argue, is that when you have to borrow all that money and people don't want to lend it to you, the way we solve that conundrum is by the Federal Reserve creating more money out of thin air and saying, okay, there are going to be just more dollars, and we're going to use those dollars to then lend money to the government. Well, this is a practice that's been tried many times in history, and every time it's been tried, it's ended in failure. This year, 2023, is the 100th anniversary of the hyperinflation in Weimar Germany, which led directly to the rise of Hitler and World War II. I'm not saying that we're facing an exactly similar situation, but one can imagine a world in which we have persistently high inflation. People who are in venture capital and investing do very well in a highly inflationary environment because the stock market does well. Tech companies are, there's a lot of money sloshing through private equity and banks and venture capital firms, and they invest it, and everyone feels really good out here. But the average person sees their dollar have less and less purchasing power as a result. And eventually that leads to massive social dislocation of a scale we have not seen in this country in a very, very long time. And that's very dangerous. The world that Stanford students are inheriting is an incredibly dangerous world, much more dangerous than the world that people my age grew up with. And I'm very concerned about that. And so that's a long preamble to say that I think a lot of people who come to a place like Stanford are eager to do good by doing well, right? To make a lot of money, be successful entrepreneurially, do something that can make the world a better place, make it more inclusive. All very noble and appropriate aspirations. And I would just say that keep in the back of your mind that if we're not finding ways to solve those two big problems, the federal debt and monetary inflation, all the other things you want to do with your life are eventually will be for naught. And so it's not enough to be merely to reconcile oneself to America's history of racial divides or gender equity or any of the other things that people like to talk about in university settings. We've really got to address economic inequality and inequality of opportunity for people who are, working 40 hours a week, making a living wage, but are going to be left behind by inflation if we don't wrestle it to the ground. That's a huge challenge, and it is solvable. It is solvable by policy changes that places like FreeOp are working on. But it's also solvable through entrepreneurship. It's solvable through innovation. It's solvable by taking the high cost of healthcare and trying to build new companies and new services that reduce the cost of healthcare, that reduce the cost of housing, and reduce the cost of higher education, frankly. So if we can do those things, we can make life affordable for more people and overcome these economic challenges.
Thank you. It's a good moment now to give word to the audience as well. We have a bit time for some questions. So Lise is helping there with the microphone. Just raise your hand and yes, please.
Well, thank you so much for both of you. You had mentioned when we were talking about this healthcare identity that in autocratic countries with leaders that are not trustworthy, that would be a real problem. You acknowledge that. And normally in America, in the past, we've never even had to think about that. It's front and center now. And that's why when you said you can't trust autocratic leaders, autocratic presidents, we have to take that into consideration now because it's a real, it could potentially be a real problem. So
I completely agree, and that's why I said the mistrust is justified. And one thing that I've been spending some of my time writing about recently, which is a threat to privacy and an effort at sort of increasing surveillance in the U.S., is a relatively obscure topic called central bank digital currencies. So there are people in the federal government and also alumni of the federal government who are really interested in this topic. And what a central bank digital currency is it's a blockchain-based version of a conventional currency. So imagine that there's it's the same technology that underlies Bitcoin, but using it applied to the U.S. dollar, where you would effectively, instead of using cash to buy goods and services or a credit card, you'd use a central bank digital currency that's basically a blockchain-based version of the US dollar. Now, all that sounds okay, like whatever, it's just a technology. But the difference is that with a central bank digital currency, every transaction enacted by or committed by any individual is recorded in this giant database that the government would own. And so literally you go to CVS and buy a can of Coke, and that would be recorded in this blockchain. And the people who are really at the forefront of this technology is China. So the People's Bank of China has built a central bank digital currency. They rolled it out at the Winter Olympics in Beijing. And they obviously love this technology because it allows them to basically not only have visibility into every financial transaction that occurs in the renminbi and occurs in China. But they can also, because it's programmable, they can say, okay, Apple Daily, which was the pro-democracy paper in Hong Kong, you know, we're not merely going to jail your publisher. We're going to basically block any transactions that you try to enact with your. You won't be able to pay your journalists. You won't be able to pay your printers. That's effectively what they did without a central bank digital currency to shut down Apple Daily a few years ago. You can do that in China with a central bank digital currency, and there are people in America, both on the left and the right, who are involved in banking policy that are really excited about a central bank digital currency. You say, hey, we can't let China, you know, take the lead in this very important 21st century technology. We've got to do that too. And so they're charging ahead with a central bank digital currency. And Paul Krugman actually tweeted the other day, you know, it's funny. My wife was standing in line for coffee, and somebody in front of her, and they live in New York, obviously, someone in front of her was ranting about how a central bank digital currency is going to take away all our freedoms. And he was kind of mocking that person, saying, oh, this is some conspiracy theorist. And I basically responded, I'm like, maybe it was me, and sent him this Forbes article I'd written the same day, basically saying, this is one of the most dangerous things that's going on in America that nobody's talking about or nobody's heard about. So I'm very much concerned about the surveillance state and the desire of some people in government to take advantage of technology to engage in censorship or economic surveillance. And that's extremely important. That's why I said it's very hard to make the case for a digital identity, because it's just there's so much mistrust, and it's very hard to make the argument, even though I believe in it, the argument, look at Estonia. They've done it in a way that's completely protecting of your sovereignty and your privacy, and it's not a surveillance system. Quite the opposite. You have the surveillance into when the government tries to look you up, which we don't have at all in the U.S. You know, the NSA or anyone, federal agencies today can be tracking you all the time, and you don't even know it. But because of all this data that private companies have access to as well as the government. So I think that's the counterintuitive element of this, that actually having digital identity done the right way can actually protect our privacy from autocratic regimes. But that argument's very hard to make. You know, there's an old adage I learned from my time on working on presidential campaigns, which is if you're explaining, you're losing. And the point being that if you can make your argument a bumper sticker and the other team has to make the argument in 5 paragraphs, you win. Doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong, but if your argument's a bumper sticker and the other person's argument is 5 paragraphs, you're going to win that argument. And that's the challenge with the privacy debate. And so I think we have to start small. We have to pilot it in a county or a state level, see if we can address those concerns and make people feel like they have the confidence that this is a system they can trust, and then go from there.
Thank you. Any other questions from the room? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for coming today. And I've been thinking a little bit about what you're saying of scalability and building trust, particularly at the state and local level. And say, for example, that there was a acceptance of a system in a place like Minnesota, and then a place like Kansas picked it up or something like that. And public trust does grow. How quickly technologically is it scalable? What kind of time frame would that look like? And compare that to a place like Estonia that's much smaller, but was doing this many years ago. Kind of what time frame were they on? And then is it feasible in a short period of time after public trust has been accepted?
Yeah, that's a case-by-case thing. Obviously, different states have different challenges in terms of do they already have infrastructure where they feel they can reach everyone in their state. This is an existing problem with a lot of social services where you try to get IDs for everybody and they don't have them for whatever reason. And we see this with some of the debates around voter ID. So in Estonia, you could vote on your phone. It's completely secure. There's no voter fraud because you have this digital identity thing where nobody can basically impersonate you. And they have higher participation as a result of that. And in the U.S., we have these controversies around voter ID. But the flip side is actually if you have voter ID laws in your state, in order to meet legal scrutiny, you basically have to make an incredible effort to try to get everyone included in the system. And that's been somewhat constructive or productive in making sure that you know who lives in your state and things like that, because they have to have some form of ID. So that there are states that have made a lot more progress with that than others. but there's a degree to which there's always going to be some edge case where maybe someone just doesn't have an idea for whatever reason. But if we look at healthcare.gov as an example, so we went through this exercise with healthcare.gov, so Obamacare comes out, and they're trying to find out, okay, how do we enroll everybody who's eligible for this program? And it was hard because there's certain people, what state do they live in? Do they live in Illinois or do they live in Missouri? Are they still alive? What's their income? And they had to create this massive infrastructure to interact with IRS databases and state databases and all this other stuff to see who was eligible for what. So it becomes challenging. But one thing that that states have learned to do is things like, okay, who's signed up for food stamps, SNAP? And if you take those individuals and say, okay, let's make sure we've got each of those individuals in a unique identifier, you start with that and move up the ladder, because like the middle class to upper middle class to upper class, that's not as much of a problem. It's usually in low income and rural settings where it's a challenge. But if you start with, okay, who's enrolled in public services today, and enroll them in a digital identity program, maybe that's a way to kind of, if you were a governor or an official in a state where you were trying to build the system, how would you do it? That's where I would start. And it would be very important to really start outside of the existing databases, because one thing that I've learned as I've observed some of this stuff is if you try to build a layer on top of the existing systems that are antiquated and very clunky in government, it's just not going to work. You kind of have to build it outside of that and start from a tabula rasa, technological tabula rasa, and build it independently of the existing system, and then gradually take the data from the legacy system and transfer it onto the new layer one, you could call it, of digital identity.
Okay, we have time at least one more question. Depends on how long is the answer, but please.
It's kind of a simple-minded question. You have to excuse me for that, but if you think about it, an Apple Watch and the many things that it can do, and then if you could imagine a mechanical solution of that type where everybody has an Apple Watch or the equivalent of an Apple Watch, doesn't that provide a new pathway to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish by just dealing with hardware rather than concepts? If you see where I'm coming from.
Meaning like the digital watch would be your identity?
Everybody would have a digital watch, and then somehow each digital watch would have its own identity, and as long as you've got your digital watch with you, you've got your identity with you. And then I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but it's the one thing that I can think of where there's kind of a broad utilization of something that has that kind of reach into who you are, because the digital watch is, pretty magic in terms of it can run a big part of your life if you turn it on that hard.
Yeah, it's theoretically possible. So I don't know how many of you raise your hand if you use the clear lane in the airport. Okay, good chunk of you, right? So if you use the clear lane, you either put your fingerprints in there or your retinal scan, and you don't have to use your driver's license or passport to show your ID. An Apple Watch or another watch like it that takes an EKG can be kind of a similar, like a digital fingerprint or a digital signature that's unique to you. So there are possibilities in theory where you could use some biometric data from a watch that would be equivalent in terms of the security, the cryptographic security or the digital security in terms of your unique identifier. Retina scan could be the same. Imagine if your camera on your phone or your watch, if your watch had a camera, could scan your retina somehow. That's not that hard to imagine a world in which you could do that. You could just scan your own retina to prove your identity. I mean, Face ID on your phones works kind of the same way. So there are things like that. In fact, I had to do this recently. It was a bit terrifying, actually. I had to file my extension for my IRS, my tax returns, and I went onto one of the sites to do it, and it basically did this thing. It's like, turn your face this way and that way so we can prove who you are. I'm like, is this going to get leaked to some hacker someday? But the government's trying to add in some of these tools to prove your identity, and you're not trying to impersonate someone else. And you're right that an Apple Watch or other watch could serve that purpose. But I think one thing that's important to remember is that the Estonian system was built 30 years ago. And it's worked very, very well. I mean, the technology that Estonia has used to create a secure digital identity is 50 years old, or maybe longer. I mean, if there's somebody in here who's a computer scientist, they could give us exact dates. But it's pretty old technology, and it's worked really well. So Yes, there are whiz-bang tools that people are developing every day in offices around here that could maybe give people that confidence, to your point, that, hey, this is secure, and your EKG scan or your retinal scan makes sure that it gives people the extra confidence. And maybe now that everyone's using Face ID to open their phones, that's gotten people a little more accustomed to that level of security or that approach to security. But, one can imagine an edge case even to that. Like, okay, a mobster grabs you, sticks your face in front of your phone, and makes you open. I mean, there's things like that where you could imagine someone saying, well, that's not going to be secure enough somehow. But that's true with PIN numbers too. So it's possible. I think if your question is, could it be that new tools give people the confidence that old tools would not give people in terms of trusting this system, then I think you might be onto something.
Okay, any final comments from the audience? Final chance to ask.
Visit Estonia. If you haven't been, I'm sure the people at the center can hook you up. It's worth doing if you're interested in this topic.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for this, taking your time. Avik, you coming here, having this talk, and being such a spokesperson for Estonia now, and for everybody else here with the comments and ideas and questions. It's been really fascinating, and I think there are several things that Estonia and US share. We both very highly value freedom. We very much believe in technology and what we can do with it, and we want to make a change for the people. Now it's just a question of how to do it, and it doesn't mean always that you have to copy, but there might be something to take into consideration from each other's experiences. So thank you once again, and thank you everybody else. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you all.